Hello and welcome. In this lesson, we're going to talk about a critical communication pattern that the collection view uses to communicate with the view controller. Now, it's not just the UI collection view that uses this pattern, but there are also a number of elements inside the UIKit library that uses this delegate and protocol pattern. Now, in this video, I'm going to tell you what it is and how it works. And then in the next lesson, we're actually going to implement it inside our match card game project. All right, let's do this. Now I first have to tell you about how collection views work, because they can be used to display tons of items, but it's not going to go ahead and display all of those items at once because of two reasons. First, your screen wouldn't be able to show all of those items anyways. And number two, if there are a large number of items and the collection view attempts to put them all onto the screen, your device might run out of memory. So there's a really smart recycling mechanism that the collection view has, and that is that it's only going to load the items that you can see on the screen right now into memory and for you to be able to see them. But then as soon as you scroll, it's going to load the next items as needed. And the items that are scrolling out of view, well, those cells get recycled and reused to show the items that are coming onto the screen. And in this way, the collection view is very efficient at displaying a large number of items while keeping the memory footprint that it uses very low. So that's the first thing that you're going to have to understand. Now, the second thing I want to remind you about is the MVC design pattern that we talked about in Module 2. If you remember, we had the model, the view controller, and the view. And the view controller gets the data from the model and passes it to the view to be displayed. But we also said that the user can interact with the view, and the view can then communicate those events to the view controller to handle those events and maybe manipulate the data. Maybe the user's deleting an item from the screen, in which case the view controller would have to convey that to the model to update the collection of data and remove that item. And it's this communication between the view talking to the view controller, this is where I want to focus. You've seen this communication before through an IB action handler for a button tap, right? The user taps on a button on the view and it triggers an IB action method in the view controller, and some code gets run to handle that button tap. You know, this is how the deal button for the war card game back in Module 1 worked. Now, just like the IB action method allows for the view to talk to the view controller, the delegate and protocol pattern is another way for that communication to happen. So now let's take a look at the collection view element and see how it uses the delegate and protocol pattern to communicate with the view controller. You see, the collection view has a property called the data source that you can assign an object to. Then the collection view is going to ask that object that is assigned to that data source property a series of questions. For example, when the collection view is displaying data, it's going to ask this object, hey, how many items am I supposed to show? And then it's up to that object to return that information to the collection view. Furthermore, the collection view is going to ask this object, the user's screen can fit about 5 of the total number of items you're asking me to display. What do you want to show for the first item? And then what do you want to show for the second item? And then what do you want to show for the third item? Until the collection view has all the information that it needs from that object to display the information on the screen. And because the collection view is efficient with memory and it has that recycling mechanism I told you earlier about, when the user scrolls the collection view to see the next row of items, you guessed it, the collection view is going to ask that object, hey, what do you want to show for the 6th item? What do you want to show for the 7th item? And so on. The way that the collection view asks these questions is by calling methods on that object that will return the information that it needs. So when it's asking the object, hey, how many items do you want me to display? It's actually calling a method on that object, and that method will return a number. And so that's the communication pattern right there. Now let's introduce the formal terminology for the scenario that I just demonstrated. The object that's set to the data source property of the collection view, that's known as the delegate. And the questions that the collection view is going to ask that object, that's the protocol part of it. So the protocol defines what sort of methods that the collection view is going to call on the delegate. Now, the collection view doesn't actually care who is assigned as the delegate. All it knows is that it's going to call the methods as defined by the protocol on the object that's set as its delegate. So to make this more concrete, let's take a look at this in the context of the MVC design pattern. The collection view is in the view controller is set as the data source of the collection view, and when that collection view needs to display data, it's going to call a method called number of items in section on the data source object, which happens to be our view controller. So we need to make sure that our view controller has a method named number of items in section that is going to return the information for the collection view. In this case, it's a number representing how many items in total we're going to get that collection view to display. And similarly, the collection view, when it needs to display cell number 1, it's going to ask the data source, it's going to call a method called 𝗧𝗶𝗺𝗲𝗀, and it's going to expect to get a cell object back for it to display. So we just have to make sure that our view controller, which is set as the delegate, is going to have that method, and in that method we're going to have to generate that cell representing that first object and pass it back to the collection view for display. When the view controller has these methods implemented that the collection view needs, the view controller is set to be conforming to that protocol. Because as you remember, the protocol is that list of questions or methods that the collection view is going to ask its delegate. So the view controller, by having these methods in the protocol, is set to be conforming to that protocol. Now in the case of the collection view, it's actually got two delegate properties. The first one being the data source property that I already told you about, and it's going to ask that delegate a set of questions related to what sort of data is going to be displayed in the collection view. The collection view also has a second delegate property, aptly named delegate, and it's going to ask this delegate another set of questions that pertains to the user interacting with the collection view itself. So when the user taps on a cell or it scrolls the collection view, it's going to notify the object set to the delegate property that those things are happening, and then that object can then run some code or do something in response. So just to warn you, you might need to watch this video from the beginning just to run through it in your head and let it sink in. In the next lesson, we're actually going to be doing this in the match card game. So that's what the protocol and delegate pattern is and how it works. You've also learned about how the collection view can recycle its cells and how it communicates with the view controller to ask for the information that it needs. And it does that through the delegate and protocol pattern. Now, in the next lesson, we're actually going to implement this in our match card game project, so it's going to be a lot more concrete. All right, I'll see you there.